My pension is only $1,000, I said, more to myself than to anyone else, staring at the paper in my hand. Kendra laughed from across the kitchen island. 1,000? Dad, you will not survive on that money. Her voice had that sharpness she used to reserve for teenage sarcasm, only now it cut deeper. Her husband, Daryl, did not even look up from his phone at first. He smirked, scratched his beard, and finally raised his eyes. You have a choice, he said. Serve me and live in the house, or go begging. Nobody will rent to a broke old man with a tiny pension. The word serve hung in the air like a bad smell. I stood there in my old denim jacket, the cuffs frayed where my wrists had rubbed them thin during years of farm work. The coffee machine hissed behind me. The house smelled of cinnamon and disinfectant, nothing like the quiet cedar and soil of my own old place. I raised you better than this, I said softly. The words felt small. Kendra rolled her eyes. You raised me in a shack, Dad. Daryl is the reason I live in a real house now. Be grateful. Daryl leaned back on the stool, a king on a cheap barstool throne. If you want a room here, you will help around the house. Clean, cook, walk the kids to school. No arguments. You cannot pay rent, so you pay with labor. Or you get out and try your luck on that glorious pension. He thought that was my only choice. He looked at my worn shoes, the creases on my hands, and saw a man with nothing left. He did not know about the 6 houses spread across the city, or the trust account that held $15 million with my name on it. He did not know that the piece of paper on the counter was not my full story, but only the part one chose to show. I folded the pension statement carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed the inside seam where my lawyer had once joked I should hide a will. The empty chair at the kitchen table stared at me, the place where my late wife, Miriam, would have sat, outraged on my behalf. Only silence sat there now. All right, I said. If those are my choices, I will need some time to think. Daryl laughed under his breath, already turning back to his phone. Do not take too long, old man. We do not run a charity. Kendra looked away, as if embarrassed to watch me shrink in front of her husband. Though she did not speak, her silence felt like a second slap. I walked out to the small back deck, where their wooden fence leaned crookedly over a patch of lifeless grass. One of the fence boards hung loose, broken at the bottom, swinging slightly in the breeze. It reminded me of something in myself that looked weak, but still held on. The sun settled low over the neat American cul-de-sac, roofs lined up like obedient soldiers. I listened to the distant sound of a lawnmower and a basketball bouncing in a neighbor's driveway. My daughter thought she had cornered me. Daryl thought he had power over my next breath. They had no idea what I truly intended to do next, or how completely their laughter would return to them. The deck boards creaked beneath my boots as I stood there that evening, watching the sunset tint the sky in quiet oranges. I tried to let the calm settle into me, though the words from inside still throbbed like a bruise. My daughter had once clung to my hand whenever the darkness frightened her. Now she treated me like a burden she wanted to assign to someone else. A memory rose, uninvited. She had been 7, maybe 8, running barefoot through the backfield behind our old farmhouse in Pine Hollow. Her hair had been tied in 2 clumsy plaits, bouncing as she chased the dog we had rescued. Miriam had stood on the porch, calling after her with a laugh that warmed the air. I had been repairing the fence, trying to finish before the evening rain. Kendra tripped on a root and scraped her knee badly. I had dropped my tools, run to her, and carried her back to the house. Her tears had soaked into my shirt. She had whispered that she needed me, that she would always need me. Those words were still inside me. They felt like ghosts now. I walked down the small stairs of the deck and stood beside the broken fence slat. My fingers touched the splintered edge. The wood had been neglected, the nails rusted. Daryl's yard looked perfect from afar, yet the closer I got, the more it revealed the truth. I knew something similar had happened to my daughter's heart. She wanted a polished life, a life that impressed her neighbors, and somehow she decided that meant distancing herself from anything that reminded her of the past. A voice called out from across the yard. It belonged to old Mr. Keene, a neighbor who spent most of his days tending roses. He leaned slightly on his cane as he peered through the gap in the fence. You settling in all right, Harold? He asked. Saw you arrive with those bags earlier. I am doing well enough, I said. He nodded, though his eyes searched mine. He had the look of someone who had watched many families and many disappointments pass through his street. If you ever need anything, This old fellow is around. Thank you, I said. That is kind. A small warmth rose in my chest. Even a simple gesture felt grounding when spoken sincerely. Back inside, I found my bag shoved into a corner near the staircase. The air smelled faintly of reheated leftover food. Daryl sat on the sofa watching television, shouting occasionally at a sports commentator. Kendra sat beside him, scrolling on her tablet. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away, pretending she had not noticed me. I brought in your things, Daryl said without turning. Guest room is upstairs, first door on the right. Make sure you do not leave a mess. We like things tidy around here. I nodded and carried my bags upstairs. The guest room had beige walls and a narrow bed pushed against one corner. A single chair sat near the window. The chair reminded me of the old rocking chair I used to sit in when watching Kendra sleep during her first year. I sat down and looked out the window, where the last few streaks of light faded behind the rooftops. I opened the drawer of the small bedside table. It was empty, except for a stray paperclip. Something about that emptiness felt symbolic. I placed my wallet inside, letting it rest there like a quiet secret. The trust information was not in the wallet, but the keys to 2 of the properties were. They clicked softly as they settled. Daryl's footsteps sounded in the hallway. He lingered outside my door before speaking. Since you are staying here rent-free, you start helping tomorrow. Wake up at 6. The kids need their breakfast prepared. I hear you, I said. He chuckled quietly as he walked away. His confidence had grown too quickly. Men who felt invincible often missed the ground shifting beneath them. I sat on the bed. The springs creaked as if shocked to hold a person. My hands rested on my knees, the years etched into the skin. I had worked in warehouses, farms, delivery jobs, and finally my small carpentry business. Everything I earned had gone into a future I hoped would protect my family. That hope felt cracked now, like the broken fence outside. In the stillness of that room, I reached into my jacket and touched the small velvet pouch that held my late wife's ring. Miriam had asked me to make sure our daughter always felt loved. I wondered what she would say if she saw this moment. Probably something gentle, something urging patience, something reminding me that storms revealed truth more clearly than sunshine. A quiet resolve settled in me. I would stay here long enough to observe, long enough to understand what had twisted my daughter's heart and inflated Daryl's pride. There was no need to raise my voice or show my hand. People who believed they held power always revealed their weaknesses eventually. I lay back on the narrow bed, letting the room fade into shadows. My eyes closed, though sleep felt distant. The house hummed with the soft murmurs of night, a place where I did not belong. Yet I remained still, letting the quiet rebuild something inside me. Something told me that the first shifts in this story had just begun, and none of them would favor Daryl once the truth surfaced. Morning crept into the room through a thin slit between the curtains. The light landed on the empty chair beside the window, reminding me of the absence that had become part of my life. My joints ached as I sat up, though the discomfort felt ordinary compared to the heaviness in my chest. I dressed quietly, reached for my jacket, and stepped into the hallway before the rest of the house stirred. Voices drifted up from downstairs as I reached the bottom step. Daryl barked orders at the children, telling them to hurry. Kendra fussed with a stack of papers, glancing at me with a tight expression that suggested impatience rather than concern. Breakfast, Dad, she said. You know the routine. I nodded. The kitchen felt crowded, even though only a few people stood inside it. I opened the fridge and found ingredients for scrambled eggs. The stove clicked to life, and I listened to the familiar sizzle that carried me back in time. There had been a winter morning when Kendra was 10. Snow piled high outside our farmhouse, burying the fences and turning the world into a white silence. She had sat at the kitchen table with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. I had prepared hot cocoa, humming a tune Miriam loved. Kendra had watched me cook eggs while tapping her cold toes on the floor. She had confided that she felt lonely at school because the other children teased her about living on a farm. I had placed a plate of eggs in front of her and told her she mattered more than any words spoken by small minds. She had smiled, resting her head against my arm. The memory felt far away now, almost belonging to someone else. I placed breakfast on the table. The children rushed forward, talking with their mouths full. Daryl did not thank me. He wiped his lips with the back of his hand and grabbed his keys. Remember to mop the floors today, he said. Kendra and I will be back late. Try not to get in the way. I will manage, I replied. The door slammed behind them, and the house settled into a hollow quiet. I washed the dishes, letting the warm water soothe my hands. A small turning point emerged within me as I stood there. I realized that their behavior revealed more about their fears than about my worth. People often acted cruelly when they feared losing the image they had crafted of themselves. Daryl needed superiority. Kendra needed acceptance. Neither need justified the way they treated me, though both explained the roots of it. I stepped outside to the driveway, intending to take a short walk. Mr. Keene waved from his rose bushes. His hat sat crooked on his head, and his gloves were stained with soil. "Out early, Harold," he called. "Good to see someone else out enjoying the morning." "I needed some air," I said. He studied me with that keen, neighborly awareness older men developed over years of observing human behavior. "Everything all right next door?" "I am settling in," I answered. "It is an adjustment." He nodded slowly. "Families can be odd things. People think respect flows one way. Life has a strange way of balancing accounts." His words stayed with me as I walked down the street. The rhythm of my steps steadied my mind. A part of me had always believed that loyalty within families was a constant. I had assumed that the sacrifices made along the way built foundations no storm could shake. The past days had shown me that even the strongest structures cracked when pride pushed too hard. A small community park sat at the end of the road. I found a bench under a maple tree and sat. Leaves from the previous autumn still gathered near the trunk, forming a soft ring. The scene reminded me of the many hours I spent repairing old furniture after Miriam passed. The steady work helped distract me from grief. It also gave me time to think through decisions, one of which had been to place most of my savings and all my property into a trust that would protect my future. I had envisioned using that trust quietly during my retirement. I had imagined traveling occasionally, perhaps joining a small community workshop, maybe volunteering at the library. I had not imagined sitting on this bench, planning how to navigate the growing disrespect of my own daughter. A boy ran past me, chasing a loose football. His mother apologized as she hurried after him. The scene stirred something gentle inside me. Children rarely understood the weight carried by the adults around them. They only sensed whether a person brought comfort or danger. I wondered what Kendra's children felt when they looked at me. Perhaps confusion. Perhaps distance. Perhaps a faint echo of the kindness I used to give their mother. When I returned to the house, the sun had risen higher. I took a moment to fix the broken fence slat. Old habits pulled me toward tools and repairs, even in places that did not belong to me. I found a hammer in the garage and straightened the board. The wood still had strength. It only needed guidance and a few firm nails. The thought settled heavily inside me. Strength did not vanish simply because others failed to recognize it. I stepped back and examined the fence. A small improvement stood before me. The yard looked less neglected. A quiet satisfaction replaced the bitterness that had lingered earlier. Inside the house, the hours passed with small tasks. I swept the hallway, folded laundry, and wiped surfaces until everything smelt faintly of lavender cleaner. None of these tasks reduced my dignity. The actions only revealed more clearly that Daryl believed power came from ordering others around. His overconfidence widened each time he left me chores, revealing a flaw that would matter soon enough. Evening arrived before I realized the time. The house felt peaceful in the fading light. I stood by the window in the guest room, watching the street lamps flicker on. A reflection of myself stared back at me in the glass. The lines on my face, the years etched in my skin, the memories carried silently. A calm recognition settled in my mind. Their betrayal would not define the rest of my days. I had resources. I had patience. I had truth on my side. Another thought followed, clearer than anything else. I would not raise my voice. I would not repay cruelty with cruelty. I would allow time, wisdom, and preparation to guide the steps ahead. Something had shifted in me fully now, something steady and unshakable. The next chapter of my life would not belong to their arrogance. It would belong to the strength I had carried through every hardship, waiting quietly for the right moment to return. I woke before the rest of the house, though the faint ache in my shoulders told me the narrow mattress had not offered much rest. A thin gray light seeped in through the curtains, giving the room a muted stillness. I sat for a moment on the edge of the bed, grounding myself in the quiet. The jacket hanging on the chair caught my eye. Its worn fabric reminded me of every journey I had undertaken to keep my family safe, fed, and sheltered. The sight steadied me. Downstairs, the kettle hissed. I prepared breakfast again, moving with a calm familiarity that no amount of condescension from Daryl could tarnish. He entered the kitchen seconds later, yawning with exaggerated irritation. The children stumbled in behind him. Kendra followed last, wearing an expression that mixed distraction with discomfort. She avoided meeting my eyes. "I hope you have kept the house in order," Daryl said as he reached for his mug. His tone carried the confidence of someone convinced he stood above consequence. "It is all in order," I replied. He grunted approval, more to himself than to me. The arrogance in his voice had grown since yesterday. His certainty that I depended on him entirely had inflated like a balloon. Balloons burst easily. As he ate, I noticed the small flicker of frustration in his posture when his tablet refused to connect to the Wi-Fi. He tapped the screen repeatedly. "I told the company to fix this last month," he muttered. "Nothing works properly in this house unless I handle it myself." The irony almost made me smile. His belief that he controlled everything blinded him to the everyday details slipping through the cracks. After breakfast, they rushed out the door once again, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume, cereal, and impatience. I waited until the last sound of the car faded before stepping outside. The broken fence that I had repaired yesterday stood firm. Mr. Keene was tending his roses again, trimming them with careful attention. "Morning, Harold," he called. "The fence looks much better." "It needed a little support," I said. He smiled knowingly. Things stand straighter when someone cares enough to fix them. I continued walking along the pavement. The crisp morning breeze brushed my cheeks, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from a nearby lawn. The neighborhood had a serene appearance, though small details revealed a deeper story. Paint peeled slightly on one garage. A hedge grew uneven near another house. Underneath every facade, something lay neglected. A small community shop sat at the corner. I decided to stop inside for a cup of tea. The shopkeeper, a woman named Clarissa, greeted me with a warm nod. She had seen me visit once before with Kendra during a holiday years ago. Her memory surprised me. "You are Kendra's father, yes?" she asked. "I am," I answered. "She used to talk about you often back then," Clarissa said as she poured the tea. "Said you worked harder than anyone she knew." Her words struck a tender place inside me. There had been a time when my daughter admired me openly. I wondered when admiration turned into embarrassment. Pride could twist quietly until affection bent under its weight. I thanked Clarissa and stepped outside again. The steam from the tea curled into the air, warming my hands. As I walked back towards the house, I found myself reflecting on the years when Kendra grew distant. It had begun slowly. She avoided bringing friends home because she felt our farmhouse looked old. She chose universities far from Pine Hollow. She returned for holidays less often. I had believed it was part of growing up. I had not realized it was the first strand in a web of resentment she would later weave. I reached the house just after noon. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. I began organizing the hallway closet, more to occupy my thoughts than out of obligation. A pile of unopened mail tumbled from the top shelf. Most of it bore Daryl's name. I recognized the look of overdue notices. The envelopes carried the same tone I remembered from the years I struggled to pay medical bills when Miriam fell ill. A quiet understanding formed. Daryl's need for dominance came from fear, not strength. Financial fear. Social fear. Fear that his image would crack if anyone knew what remained behind closed doors. That fear made him belittle others to reassure himself of his own stability. He had mistaken me for someone he could lean upon without offering respect. The front door opened unexpectedly. I stepped back as Daryl entered, his face flushed. "What are you doing with that?" he snapped, gesturing at the scattered envelopes. "They fell while I was organizing the shelf," I said. "I was placing them back." His jaw tightened. "You stay out of my things." "Understood. I understand," I replied. My tone remained even. His reaction, however, revealed more than he intended. The cracks in his mask widened. Kendra walked in behind him, carrying shopping bags. She glanced at the envelopes on the floor and then at Daryl. Something in her eyes flickered, perhaps uncertainty, perhaps fear. She bent down to pick them up quickly, as if hiding them erased their existence. "I asked Dad to help with the haul," she said to Daryl, though I had heard no such request. Daryl exhaled sharply. "Fine. Just keep things where they belong." He walked away, shoulders stiff. His steps carried the agitation of a man wrestling with problems larger than he wished to admit. Kendra remained in the hallway with me. She held the envelopes against her chest. Her voice softened, barely above a whisper. He is under a lot of pressure. It has been a difficult month. I see that, I said. She looked at me briefly, then turned away. The conversation ended, but the moment stayed with me. The small shift in her tone suggested she sensed something wrong with the way they had been treating me. The opening was narrow, yet it existed. Later, as the sun descended, I stood once more by the repaired fence. Its stability mirrored the quiet resolve growing inside me. Each day revealed more of the truth behind the disrespect, more of the insecurities tied to their choices, more of the reasons they clung to control. I understood now that patience would be my sharpest tool. Preparation would be my shield. Daryl had overplayed his confidence, and his circumstances would soon turn that overconfidence into a lesson he could not ignore. A single thought settled firmly as night approached. The story unfolding inside this house had already begun shifting towards its inevitable reckoning, quietly guided by the strength I had never lost. The morning began with the soft patter of rain against the window. The sound carried a calm rhythm that steadied my thoughts as I rose from the narrow bed. The jacket on the chair seemed darker in the dim light, the fabric still holding memories of years that shaped me. The rain reminded me of nights on the farm when I worked beneath storm clouds to protect the crops. Those storms taught me that strength often grew in silence rather than noise. In the kitchen, I prepared breakfast with the same steady movement as the days before. Daryl wandered in first, hair uncombed and irritation already forming on his face. He barely acknowledged me as he poured coffee. Kendra arrived with a hesitant expression, glancing at him before taking her seat. The children hurried in, unaware of the tension weaving through the room. Daryl muttered something about his work schedule, scrolling through his phone with restless impatience. His tone sharpened when the kettle clicked off. I am late again. This house is chaos. I can help with the school run, I said calmly. He paused, then shrugged without gratitude. Do what you want. Just make sure the house is clean when we get back. Their morning rush spilled into the driveway. The front door closed, leaving behind a silence almost heavier than their voices. I sat at the table for a moment before clearing the dishes. The rain continued outside, creating streaks across the glass doors that looked like thin silver threads. A memory slipped into my mind. It was a rainy evening years ago when Kendra was 16. I had waited outside her school auditorium after her choir performance. She emerged with her friends, laughing, though the moment she saw me, her smile dimmed. She had been embarrassed by the pickup truck I drove. I had worked double shifts that month to replace the tires, thinking it would help her feel proud. Instead, she had avoided walking beside me, perhaps afraid others would see how ordinary her life truly was. That night, I drove home gripping the steering wheel tightly, promising myself that her future would be easier than mine. I had not realized I was planting the roots of her resentment in the soil of that promise. Once the house settled, I walked through each room slowly, observing the details that revealed more than Daryl intended. The carpet edges had begun curling near the hallway. The kitchen tap dripped despite being tightly screwed. A stack of receipts sat half hidden under a bowl. The signs of strain multiplied the longer I looked. My steps carried me to the garage. The air smelled of motor oil and dust. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, glowing weakly. I found a toolbox tucked behind bicycles and storage boxes. The sight of the tools steadied me. Years of carpentry work had taught me to solve problems quietly. I handled each tool with care, absorbing the feeling of familiarity. A small shift in my thinking emerged as I organized the shelves. I no longer saw myself as a guest relying on their mercy. I recognized the truth. They depended on the perception of my helplessness to maintain their illusion of control. The weight of that illusion would soon become too heavy for them to carry. Footsteps startled me slightly. I turned to see one of the children standing in the doorway. The younger girl, Lila, held a broken toy in her hands. Her eyes were wide with uncertainty. "Grandpa," she whispered, "can you fix this?" "Let me have a look," I said. She placed the toy on the workbench. The leg of the small wooden horse had snapped. I repaired it with gentle pressure and a small amount of glue from the toolbox. She watched closely, her face brightening as the horse regained its shape. "You make things better," she said softly. The simple statement tightened my throat. Her innocence felt like a faint echo of the love I once shared with her mother. She hugged the toy, then scampered back toward the house, leaving me alone with the quiet satisfaction of having mended something small but sincere. Later in the afternoon, the rain cleared. I stepped outside and walked to the repaired fence. The wood looked stronger than when I had found it. A dry leaf clung to the top, trembling slightly in the breeze. The small symbol felt meaningful, reminding me that stability returned when someone took time to rebuild it. Mr. Keene called to me from his garden. "You have been busy these days, Harold." "I find work helps me think," I said. He nodded. "You carry a lot more sense than most men I have met. People overlook quiet strength. They assume noise means power. Noise fades quickly," I replied. "Strength does not." We spoke briefly about the weather, then parted ways. Something in his words stayed with me as I walked back to the house. He saw more than he said. Older men recognized the signs of someone reaching their limit. Evening came. Daryl and Kendra returned, their voices carrying tension through the front door. I heard him complaining about a client who refused to pay on time. He blamed traffic, his boss, his colleagues. Kendra tried to soothe him, though her tone shook slightly. When they entered the kitchen, they found the house in perfect order. Dinner waited on the table. The children sat chatting quietly. Daryl paused, surprised by the calm. "You really did everything," he said, though his voice carried annoyance rather than appreciation. "It was no trouble," I said. He sat heavily in his chair. Something flickered across his face, a brief moment of doubt. He did not like that the house looked better under my care than under his management. His confidence faltered, though he tried to mask it. Kendra lowered herself into her seat slowly, her eyes drifting toward me. The earlier flicker of uncertainty appeared again. She seemed torn between loyalty to her husband and the echo of the affection she once had for me. Dinner passed with quiet tension. After clearing the plates, I returned to the guest room. The worn jacket waited on the chair as though inviting me to sit and gather my thoughts. I placed my hands on the back of the chair and breathed deeply. The day had revealed truths that could no longer be ignored. Their lives were not as stable as they pretended. Their confidence had begun to fracture. Their treatment of me stemmed from fear of losing control, not from true superiority. A steady thought shaped itself fully in my mind. Their actions would face consequences soon, not through anger or retaliation, but through the simple unfolding of truth. I had patience, resources, and clarity. They had pride, pressure, and secrets. My strength had returned fully now, not loud or forceful, but quiet and steady, like the roots of an old tree hidden beneath the soil. The next morning arrived with a heavy sky that held the scent of an approaching storm. I rose before dawn again, though the fatigue in my bones felt deeper than usual. My mind had worked through the night, sorting memories and present tensions into a quiet structure. Each passing day made the truth more visible. The cracks in Daryl's confidence spread wider, and Kendra's uncertainty deepened into something closer to guilt. These changes created a tension inside the house that no amount of cleaning or calmness could mask. In the kitchen, I prepared breakfast with slow, deliberate movements. The rhythm of whisking eggs, slicing fruit, and placing plates on the table helped steady my thoughts. The worn jacket hung across the back of a chair, watching silently like an old friend who understood every shift in my inner world. The house creaked under its own weight, as if aware that something within its walls was beginning to shift. Daryl entered first. His hair was unkempt, and dark circles marked his eyes. He muttered to himself as he scrolled through his phone. His jaw tightened the longer he stared at the screen. I suspected another overdue notice had arrived, though he would never admit it. Kendra followed, her expression tight. She pressed her fingers against her temples. The strain of their situation had begun to show in her posture. She sat at the table without greeting me, though she glanced at me once with an expression I could not decipher completely. During breakfast, the children spoke softly to each other. Their innocence created a fragile contrast to the adults who sat beside them. I noticed the younger one, Lila, holding the wooden horse I repaired. She kept the toy close to her chest, as if it brought comfort. That small detail offered me a reminder of why patience mattered. After the family left, I stood in the quiet kitchen and let out a slow breath. The house felt fragile, like a structure built on the wrong foundation. I started the day's tasks, though my mind wandered repeatedly to a memory I had not revisited in years. There had been a summer afternoon at the old farmhouse, long before everything changed. Miriam had been ill, though she tried to hide it. She sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket while I repaired the barn roof. Kendra had been in college at the time and rarely visited. She arrived that day unexpectedly, carrying books she planned to return to a friend. She stayed only an hour, leaving before Miriam managed to rise from her chair. That moment planted a question inside me. I wondered whether she visited out of obligation rather than love. The doubt faded at the time because I refused to believe it. The years that followed brought the answer slowly, piece by piece, until it formed a truth I could no longer ignore. Around noon, I walked outside to take in some fresh air. The sky had darkened. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. Mr. Keene stood near his rose bushes again, trimming them gently. He gave me a thoughtful look. "You seem deep in thought today, Harold," he said. "I am sorting through things," I replied. "Anyone who carries your kind of patience is bound to uncover what others try to hide." He meant no intrusion, though his words settled inside me with surprising accuracy. He saw more than a neighbor usually did. He sensed the imbalance in the house next door and recognized how a man like me endured it. As the first drops of rain began to fall, I returned inside. The sound against the roof created a steady drum that filled the house. I walked into the living room and noticed something unusual. A stack of papers half concealed under the sofa caught my attention. A breeze from the open window had blown one sheet free. The document was a reminder of an unpaid insurance bill. I placed it back carefully, not intending to pry but unable to ignore what it meant. Their debts were real, growing and pressing harder each month. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see Kendra, standing at the doorway to the living room. Her posture looked smaller than usual. "Dad," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded and sat down. She approached hesitantly, clutching her hands together. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke again. "I know things have been tense. Daryl has been stressed about work. Money has been tight. He has been on edge. I understand pressure," I said. She looked at me with a flicker of shame. "I know we have not treated you well. I have been thinking about it. I feel trapped, and I do not know how to apologize without making things worse." Her words stirred something deep within me. This was the first honest reflection she had offered since I arrived. The guilt in her voice revealed a crack far more important than the ones in the hall carpet or the kitchen tap. "There is always a choice," I said gently. "Pressure does not excuse disrespect." She blinked rapidly, struggling to maintain composure. "I know. I am trying to fix things. I just do not know how." Her vulnerability created a quiet opening. I did not push it. A seed of reflection needed time to grow. Daryl returned not long after, slamming the front door. His harsh footsteps traveled through the hall. He muttered curses under his breath. He spotted me sitting in the living room and scowled. "What are you doing just sitting there?" he demanded. "There is plenty to be done in this house." His tone held less confidence than usual. Something had rattled him. Perhaps another overdue notice. Perhaps a confrontation at work. His pride had begun to wobble. "I have already completed the tasks for today," I said. He scoffed. "You act like you are doing us a favor." The words slid off me like rainwater off old timber. His anger had nothing to do with me. It belonged to his own fears. The storm outside intensified. Lightning lit the windows briefly. Thunder shook the air. The children huddled together on the sofa, clinging to blankets. Their fear reminded me of the many storms I had sheltered Kendra from. I watched her sit beside them, smoothing their hair. Something softened in her expression. Night approached, and the air inside the house grew thick with tension. Daryl paced back and forth, snapping at small inconveniences. He believed he held control, though everything around him indicated the opposite. When I returned to the guest room, the jacket waited on the chair, just as it always did. I touched the fabric and felt the familiar reassurance of every hardship I had endured. The storm outside matched the storm inside the house, yet I felt an unexpected calm settling inside me. Another turning point had arrived, subtle but undeniable. Their situation was beginning to collapse beneath the weight of their hidden struggles. My presence no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a mirror placed before them, revealing truths they had tried to hide. The unraveling had begun, and nothing would stop it now. The next dawn carried a strange stillness. The storm had passed, though the air retained that faint metallic scent that follows heavy rain. I rose slowly, letting my feet touch the cool floor before standing. The faint ache in my knees reminded me of the years behind me, yet my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. A sense of direction had begun forming like a distant coastline coming into view. Downstairs, the house remained quiet. I brewed a pot of tea and stood by the window while the sky brightened. The repaired fence stood firm, the roses in Mr. Keen's garden shimmered with droplets, and the street looked washed clean. The morning felt honest in a way the household had not been in a long while. The first to appear was Kendra. She stepped into the kitchen with slow, hesitant movements. Her hair was tied loosely, and her eyes had a tired heaviness that revealed she had slept little. She lingered in the doorway as if unsure whether she should speak. "Morning, Dad," she said softly. "Good morning," I replied, offering her a cup of tea. She accepted it and sat at the table. She held the mug between both hands, as though seeking warmth from it. Silence stretched for a moment. She finally looked up. "I have been thinking about everything," she said. "I know I have allowed things to get out of hand. I wanted to keep the peace, and I thought that meant agreeing to whatever made life easier. I see now that it only made things worse." Her honesty felt fragile but genuine. I waited a moment before responding. "Peace cannot survive where respect is missing." She nodded slowly. "I know. I am trying to find the courage to change things." I placed my hand gently on the table. "You are stronger than you believe." Tears gathered in her eyes, though she blinked them back. A small shift had taken root within her. The guilt that had weighed on her for days had begun transforming into awareness. Awareness had the power to lead to better choices if she allowed it. The children arrived next. Lila held her wooden horse, which she carried everywhere now. The innocent trust in her eyes brought a small comfort. She climbed onto my lap briefly before scampering to the table. Moments like that reminded me why patience mattered. Pain should never pass from one generation to the next if it could be stopped. Daryl entered last. His expression resembled a gathering storm despite the calm outside. He stared at his phone with growing agitation. His voice wavered slightly when he spoke. "The company cut my hours. Completely ridiculous. They have no idea what they are doing." Kendra stiffened in her seat. Her fingers tightened around her mug. She had expected this, I suspected. She understood the consequences long before Daryl admitted them. Daryl looked at me with irritation. "You might as well make yourself useful today. A few things need fixing. The sink, the loose stair rail, the garage door." "I can assist," I said quietly. His tone did not deserve a battle. His behavior revealed everything I needed to know. He turned to leave the room, though he paused when another notification sounded on his phone. The way his shoulders tensed told me it was not good news. The cracks within him widened. When they all left for work and school, the house settled into its usual hollow quiet. I finished the tasks he mentioned, not because he ordered them, but because the work settled my thoughts. As I tightened the loose stair rail, I remembered the many times I had climbed the farmhouse steps carrying groceries or firewood. Those steps creaked loudly, yet Miriam always said the sound comforted her. She liked knowing I was home. That memory warmed me in a way this house never could. Around midday, I walked outside to gather myself. The sky had cleared completely. The air smelled fresh. I found myself standing with Mr. Keen again. He knelt near his roses, placing mulch carefully around the stems. "You have been deep in thought," he said. "Your shoulders look lighter today." "I have found clarity," I replied. He smiled. "Clarity has a way of rearranging everything." I continued walking until I reached the small park at the end of the street. I sat on the bench beneath the maple tree. The leaves shimmered in the sunlight. A memory drifted into view, gentle and bittersweet. It was the last day Miriam could walk without help. She sat beneath a tree much like this one. I held her hand while Kendra sat nearby reading a book. Miriam had squeezed my fingers and said, "Strength returns to a patient heart." Those words echoed with new meaning now. Returning to the house, I prepared dinner early. The structure of the day helped me stay centered. As I cooked, I thought about the trust account, the properties scattered across the city, and the long-term planning that had kept my future secure. I had built my life carefully, knowing hardship could arrive without warning. Their assumption that I depended on them had blinded them to the truth. Their poor treatment revealed their character, not my worth. The family returned in the evening. Their mood carried an unusual heaviness. Daryl looked worn, his earlier frustration replaced by something closer to worry. Kendra avoided his gaze, though she watched me with quiet concern. Dinner unfolded in uneasy silence. Daryl barely touched his plate. He left the table abruptly, muttering something about needing to make calls. His confidence had begun to crumble under the weight of reality. Kendra lingered behind after clearing the dishes. She spoke quietly. I want to understand how to fix things between us. It begins with honesty, I said. And courage. She nodded slowly, as though absorbing each word like a lesson she had needed for years. When I finally returned to the guest room, the jacket waited faithfully on the chair. I touched the worn fabric with a quiet understanding. Everything had begun shifting. Their confidence had weakened. Their disrespect had exposed its roots. My strength had returned in full. Another thought settled inside me. Justice would not come through anger. It would come through truth. And truth was already on its way. Morning returned with a pale light that filtered gently across the window. I rose slowly, letting the familiar ache in my joints settle before taking a steady breath. The house felt unusually calm. The stillness carried a sense of expectation, as though the walls themselves understood that the shape of things had begun to change. My jacket hung on the back of the chair once more, its worn fabric reminding me of everything I had endured and everything I had quietly prepared for. I stepped into the hallway and descended the stairs. The scent of toast drifted faintly from the kitchen. Kendra stood at the counter, helping the children pack their school bags. She glanced at me and offered a small, almost vulnerable smile. I returned it, sensing the shift that had taken root inside her over the past days. Her posture held less tension. She looked at me, not through me. Daryl entered moments later. His hair was uncombed and his face drawn. He walked with the uneasy hesitation of a man who no longer felt certain of himself. His phone remained in his hand, though he looked reluctant to check it. A sense of dread seemed to follow every digital notification that reached him. Breakfast passed with fragile quiet. The children chattered softly. Kendra helped them put on their jackets before stepping onto the porch. She called to me as she walked them toward the car. "We will see you later, Dad." Her voice carried warmth I had not heard in years. Once the house settled into silence again, I poured myself a cup of tea and took a seat at the kitchen table. The jacket lay across the back of my chair. My fingers brushed its sleeve, recalling the countless moments it had accompanied me through hard winters and long days of work. That jacket had witnessed my entire journey. It seemed fitting that it would witness the final turn as well. A gentle knock sounded at the front door. I stood and opened it to find Mr. Keene holding a small envelope. He extended it with a kind expression. "This came to my mailbox by mistake, Harold," he said. "The label shows your name." I thanked him. He nodded thoughtfully before returning to his garden. The envelope felt familiar the moment I touched it. My lawyer had used the same cream-colored paper for years. I opened it, revealing a brief annual summary of the trust account and a friendly reminder about the 6 properties I continued to own across the city. The timing felt almost poetic. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside the sink, not intending to reveal it immediately. Truth did not need to be rushed. Truth worked best when it settled naturally into the spaces where assumptions once lived. Near midday, Daryl returned unexpectedly. He pushed the door open and stepped inside with sharp, restless steps. A suit jacket hung over his arm, though his clothes looked crumpled. His jaw moved as if he was grinding unspoken frustration. He tossed his keys onto the counter. One of the keys slid and fell to the floor. He ignored it. "The bank refused to extend the payment period," he said harshly. "The insurance company wants everything up front. None of this should be happening." I listened quietly. His voice trembled slightly. The arrogance that once steadied him had collapsed fully. Pride had brought him here, and pride had left him unprepared for consequences. He paced across the kitchen. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to run a household? I have been carrying everything on my back." "You should not carry everything alone," I said. He stopped abruptly and glared at me. "Do not lecture me. You came here with nothing. You act like you deserve comfort when we are the ones giving it to you." His words no longer stung. They revealed his fear more than his judgment. "I did not come here with nothing," I said calmly. He frowned. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, Kendra returned through the front door. She looked startled to see him home. Her eyes traveled from his tense posture to my steady one. Something inside her seemed to click into place, as if she finally understood the true shape of the situation. "Daryl," she said quietly, "you have not told me everything, have you?" He avoided her eyes. The silence that followed spoke louder than either of us could. I crossed the room and opened the drawer. The cream-colored envelope rested inside. I lifted it and held it gently. I have not been honest either, I said, though my voice remained soft. Not because I intended to mislead anyone, but because I never imagined the truth would matter in this way. Kendra looked at me, confusion turning slowly into apprehension. This house is not the only place I could live, I continued. I own several properties. My retirement account is not my only income. I placed everything in a trust years ago. Miriam always encouraged long-term planning. She believed preparation gave a person freedom. Kendra's jaw trembled slightly. Her hand rose to her mouth. Her eyes filled with disbelief mixed with deep regret. Daryl stared at me as if I had spoken in another language. He took a step back, his confidence collapsing entirely. That cannot be true, he whispered. You said your pension was only 1,000. My pension is 1,000, I said. My life savings are not. Silence filled the room. It stretched long enough for the truth to settle into every corner of the house. Kendra finally spoke. Her voice shook. Dad, why did you not tell us? I believed you loved me without needing to know what I owned, I answered. I also believed respect should not be tied to money. The quiet after those words carried a weight that felt almost cleansing. Daryl stepped back again, his eyes flickering between us. His voice came out thin. We did not know. You did not ask, I said gently. Kendra sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Her eyes brimmed with tears. The guilt she had tried to suppress rose fully now, though I felt no desire to see her suffer. I am so sorry, she whispered. I forgot who you were. I let pressure change me. I sat beside her. You can choose differently now. She leaned forward, resting her forehead in her hands. The children's laughter from the previous evening returned briefly in my memory, reminding me that the next generation deserved better. Daryl quietly moved toward the doorway. His pride had nowhere left to hide. His choices had caught up with him. He stood there in silence, confronted finally by the truth he never anticipated. A calmness settled inside me. I had not raised my voice. I had not sought revenge. I had only allowed truth to arrive on its own terms. The consequences unfolded naturally. Evening descended slowly. The lights softened across the floorboards. The house felt different, as though a heavy weight had lifted. I stepped outside and stood by the repaired fence. The wood held firm. The breeze carried the scent of fresh earth from Mr. Keen's roses. Everything felt steady again. I rested my hand on the fence and breathed deeply. Strength had returned. Dignity had remained. Peace had found its place. A single thought lingered in the quiet. A patient heart always finds its way home. If this story left a mark, stay with the channel. There are many more journeys of strength, quiet courage, and long-earned wisdom waiting. Like, share, and subscribe so the next chapter of resilience finds its way to you.